It's always wonderful to come to Church Street. I always am homesick for Church Street. I have been since I left 30 years ago. I can't believe it's been 30 years. And it's wonderful to be back. And I would have to say I got lost when I came in this way. I couldn't find the parish hall. So thank you for being here and for inviting me to participate in this very important event. And thank you for the committee that has planned this. It is a crucially important event. Caregiving. How many of you are currently caregivers? How many of you have been caregivers? So that's about everybody here. If you haven't been, I would say you will be, or you will be cared for. For that is very nature of what life is about, caring and being cared for. Now the book that was referred to, and there are copies over here in case any of you want some nighttime reading to cure your insomnia. The book is available. It's written from the perspective of a theological lens through which to view dementia, because dementia is viewed almost exclusively in our society through a medical lens. And the medical lens is crucially important, but it's very limited. It's limited to what's going on in this little 3-pound organ here in the head, the brain. But we are more than that organ. And in fact, memory is more than is contained here. Memories are held in community. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the book is also the outgrowth of a course that I teach or taught before COVID at the Lutheran Seminary in Columbia, Pastoral Care and Dementia. 50% of each class session is held, it includes a didactic session, and the second half of the class, every session, is in the memory unit at the Heritage at Lowman, where we interact with people living with dementia. Just one note about the closing remarks at 3 o'clock or so. That's going to be a closing worship service. And I'll be using the worship service that I use with the memory care facility at the Heritage at Lowman. You will be worshiping the way the people at Lowman would worship. I lead worship there. Well, caregiving, and I entitled this Caregiving as a Means of Grace. Caregiving is, according to the CDC, is a growing public health issue, almost a crisis. 53 million people are currently engaged in volunteer caregiving, and 26% of those are caring for people who are living with dementia. That is expected to double in 25 years. Because the number of people living with dementia is expected to double within the next 25 years. There are currently about 6 million people living with dementia. And now, how many of you as caregivers have been caregivers of people living with dementia? Okay, how many of you have had spouses with dementia? Okay, everyone here has been touched with dementia, either with family members or friends. And if you haven't been, you will be. Because of the aging of our population, the population of the number living with dementia is going to be increasing. So I'm going to be sharing some out of my own experience of my 10-year journey, 10 to 12-year journey with Linda's frontotemporal dementia. And Sherry, our daughter, is here, and she shared that journey with us. We moved down to South Carolina from Durham to be near the family because it takes a community, and especially a family. So we moved near our family to be supportive and support one another in the journey. So what I'm going to make 3 basic points. You know, every preacher used to be, we were trained, some of us, back in the old days when we were trained in preaching, 3 points and a poem. I'm going to have 3 points and a video. But the basic things I have gleaned in my journey with Linda and with my own experience in studying something about dementia, as I've tried to learn as much as I can. There are 3 points I want to make. One is caregiving is a divine calling. 2, grace is foundational for all caregiving. And 3, incarnational presence is the essence of that call and that grace. So, caregiving as a call. I was in the dream position at Duke. As a professor, I was at the pinnacle. How many, see, we got Duke graduates here. I was in heaven when Linda was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. I then felt I was in a vocational decision. Do I continue as a professor, which I was loving, or believing that God calls us in the midst of our contexts? I felt I was called to be a caregiver. That was my way of living out my baptismal identity and my ordination. How do I live out my calling as a Christian disciple and an ordained clergy? How do I live that out now? And I concluded my calling is to be a caregiver. Well, it occurs to me that in fact we are all called at our baptism to be caregivers. That is the primary call. We are created to care for one another. We are created as interdependent creatures. We are created as stewards of each other's resources and the resources of the world. We are created in the image of the divine, whose very nature is love. And that love is built into the very structure of all reality. Now, what is that love? It's not mere sentiment. Love is that energy. It is a power. It is an energy present in all of creation that is the drive, the wooing, the pull toward oneness, toward union, toward mutual nourishing and nurture of one another. We were created in the image of God to be co-creators with God in the ongoing process of creation. So we are created to care for one another and for the whole creation, because it is within that whole creation that love is ever pulling us toward the oneness that our preacher was talking about this morning, the unity. God is present in the whole of creation, ever bringing new life, new birth, reconciliation, ever striving to bring the whole creation into oneness. You have this outline on your table if you want to follow it. I'm from the old school. PowerPoints, I don't know quite how to operate them, so I use outlines. Well, so we are participants in the ongoing nature and mission of God, which is the nurturing, the fulfillment, the unity of the whole of creation. Our primary call is to share in this divine flow of love. This love is, you see it in the creation itself, the power that brings creation into being, the power that brings springtime, that goes through the seasons of the year. That love is present in creation, in everything. It is everywhere. And that drive is to bring union, interdependency, mutual nourishing, mutual fulfillment of the whole of creation. And we are participants in that flow of divine love. That's our primary reason to be as human creatures. We were created in the image of God out of love to be a participant in love. Does that make sense? Does it just sound like a lot of mumbo jumbo? But to know the reality that there is a power all around us and within us that is ever driving us toward wholeness, that is ever wooing us, beckoning in us, calling us toward wholeness and toward one another, toward unity with each other. Yes, sexuality is a part of that, but that what we see in sexuality is more of a metaphor of what's happening in the whole of creation, the pulling together of, the mutual nourishing of, the mutual enjoyment of, the mutual celebration of, the whole of life. That's what we're created for. And that requires we care for each other. We care for the creation. We care for all beings. We care for the natural order. It is participating in the eternal flow of God's love. So we are, as we were reminded this morning, the commandment, we are to love God, who is that power out there and here in here. We're to love that God, but we're to love our neighbor. And our neighbor is, yes, humans, but they're even non-humans. The whole created order. They're our neighbors. They're a part of our neighborhood. And we are called to participate in that flow of love. And in John, love one another as I have loved you. Jesus left us only one commandment to his disciples. He didn't say, you are to believe this about me. That was not his command. You are to behave this way in every circumstance. No, I leave you with one command. Love one another as I have loved you. And how has he loved us? Giving himself on our behalf. Ever drawing forth our own love. And one of the great fears of people, all of us, I suppose, at least in our culture, one of the great fears is the fear of being a burden. I don't want to be a burden. How many times did I hear Linda say that? How many times have you heard it said? How many times have you said it? Well, get over it. We came into the world as a burden, didn't we? I mean, when Sherry was born, did Glenda and I say, well, look at this little bird. Yes, there were some burdensome tasks. But she was not a burden. She was a gift. And all gifts are accompanied by responsibilities. And the responsibility is to nurture that gift and to enable that gift to flourish. So we came into the world interdependent, and we leave the world interdependent. We exist in the world interdependent, but we live in a culture that prizes individual autonomy, and there is no such thing as individual autonomy. No one is an island. We value individual autonomy, and we value self-sufficiency and capacities. That's how we value my personal capacities. But we are more than our capacities. So, when you talk about bearing one another's burdens and fulfill the law of Christ. And what is the law of Christ? Love one another as I have loved you. That's the very essence of what it means to be human. To be fully human as God created us. Interdependent, mutually supportive, mutually helpful, bearing one another's burdens. Participating in this eternal flow of love. And every act of love is a participation in the love of God. Well, caregiving is also a call to discipleship. At least a call to grow in discipleship. I remember when I came back, Marianne, how long was it? You had me come back here 2 or 3 years ago to talk about my faith journey.
About a year ago.
I said only a year ago. See, I live in a time warp.
That's because you're old.
Sylvia Mooney. It takes one to know one.
I'm older than you are.
You're older than I am. I can say I have a long way to go in my growth in my discipleship. But the most intense period of growth in my own discipleship was the 10 years of my journey with Linda. I grew more in my own relationship with God and with the meaning of the Christian faith. I've taught the Christian faith, and I've preached it, and I believed it, and I've tried to live it. But I tell you, you practice the Christian faith when you're living with people who are living with dementia. You see, discipleship is basically participation in the triune God's dance of love. And love is a dance. Now, Linda would tell, if Linda were here, she'd, now, Kenneth, you don't know anything about dancing. You never could dance. But from what I know about dancing, sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow. And sometimes you may have to lift your partner. Well, we're participants in the triune God's dance of love. You see, God in 3 persons, it's a dance of love. And we are invited to participate in that dance. And sometimes we are able to take initiative and agency in that dance. And other times we are the ones who have to be lifted. We follow. And it is no less an act of love to receive love than it is to give love. And I repeat that. It is no less an act to receive love than it is to give love. In fact, I dare say that many of us would find it easier to give love, meaning to give help, than to accept help. Linda, when she could no longer express her love toward me, maybe not even knowing precisely who I was, received my love. She received my care. And in receiving my care, helped me to grow in love. Helped me to grow to love without reciprocity. So much of our love is reciprocal. We love because we get something in return. Mature love, agape, loving as Christ loves, is to love for the sake of loving, participating in this dance of love or this flow of love, to care for another, whether you get anything in return or not. You are getting something in return. You're growing in your capacity to love. And you know what I miss the most about Linda? Well, lots of things. I don't know whether to say it the most. But I miss the simple things. Brushing her hair. Or brushing her teeth. Just caressing her face. Feeding her. Well, feeding her. But feeding her her favorite ice cream. Mint chocolate chip. The last thing she ate before she died. So that mint chocolate chip is almost sacramental. But is that not what the sacrament's about? Feeding and receiving. The broken body, the shed blood. And I believe this with all my heart. No act of love is ever wasted. You may not see the results. You may not experience the consequences. But it's adding to that flow of the divine love. It's adding to that stream of love flowing in the world. No act of love is ever wasted. The simple acts. Jesus said it, didn't he? A cup of water, a visit to the sick, to the imprisoned, a word of comfort. It's not rocket science. It's what, again, our speaker said this morning. When in doubt, just love. Just love. God will use it. I don't know how. I may never see it. But God is love. And if you want to develop the fruits of the Spirit, care for another, especially someone with dementia. Because you see, these fruits of the Spirit, they are practices of, can you name love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness in sickness and in health, gentleness, self-control. Boy, those had to be practiced in. Harshness won't work with someone with dementia. Arguments won't work. You'll lose every one of them. Patience, you have to practice. Generosity, you've got to keep giving and giving and giving. Gentleness. Caring for someone with dementia is a wonderful opportunity to develop the fruits of the Spirit. I still have a long ways to go. But boy, Linda helped me a lot with that. Now, there are many challenges, and I would not want to in any way sugarcoat caregiving. You know it. Those of you who are caregivers, it's tough, isn't it? And caregiving with someone with dementia is especially difficult. It's 24/7. And even when you get a break, the person's still on your mind, right? You're still wondering, are they okay? Are they still behaving okay? Especially if it's frontal temporal dementia, where there's some personality changes. And there is, as there is in all forms of dementia. But the challenges. Well, what are some of the challenges? Just name some of them. What are some of the challenges you've had in caregiving?
Repetition.
What?
Repetition.
Repetition. Oh, yes.
Keeping on, keeping on.
Keeping on, keeping on. Boy, patience and perseverance.
Fatigue.
Pardon?
Fatigue.
Fatigue. Wow. Sleeplessness.
Safety. Safety.
Safety. Got to be concerned about safety. Linda reached a stage when she thought she has a paranoia with her dementia, and she thought I was going to hurt her. She thought I was out to hurt her. Now, boy, that's hard when the person you love and want to help the most won't let you help her. The reason I had to admit her to the memory facility, she wouldn't let me care for her. And admitting to the memory facility created all kinds of stuff for me. Guilt of abandoning her. I still feel it. And Sherry and Sandra, Dad, you had no choice. But I still feel, well, did I really? Could I have really done it? All those ambivalent feelings. And the guilt. The isolation. Did you ever feel isolated as a caregiver? Well, people with dementia are isolated. Some of it's self-isolation. Linda didn't want to be with people after when she was aware. She was more of an introvert anyhow. Many of you knew Linda. She was more of an introvert, but when she was aware that some of the filters were leaving, and she might say the wrong thing or do something inappropriate, she wouldn't want to be with other people. And going to church became a source of frustration, a source of anxiety for me, and at least once a source of humor. I'll tell you that, because you got to have humor. You got to keep your sense of humor. You don't laugh at, but you laugh about and with. The last time Linda went to worship, the preacher was about 10 minutes into the sermon. Now remember, the filters are leaving. And Linda leaned over and said, "When's he ever going to stop?" I was sinking down in the pew. And after the service, I regained my composure and that little sense of humor. And I said, well, she was only saying what 50% of the people were saying. And this one right here, Sherry said, "No, Dad. She was really saying what she's wanted to say about your preaching." That may have been the last time Linda and I went to church. But the guilt, the isolation, and the finances. Linda required, when in the memory facility, it's costly. You know, it's costly. But we had 24/7 care when she came home. That's even more costly. So you watch your pension funds Go down. So the finances add to the, so there are all kinds of challenges. So I don't want to minimize those. But the challenges are enormous. But that's the reason that we have to have grace. Grace is the foundation for all caregiving. And I worked on this sentence, so I want you to look at it on your outline. The definition of grace. We throw that word around a lot. Grace. Grace. The gift of God's presence and power to create, liberate, restore, reconcile, heal, and transform human hearts, relationships, communities, and the entire cosmos into the new creation. Now, don't you think that was written by a pastor that taught at Duke? Who learned at Duke that when you have a question, well, what do you mean by grace? You don't know the answer? You say, well, I don't know, but let me elaborate. You didn't get that, did you? No, you see, grace is another word for this love we were talking about. It is universally present. Wesley talked about it: prevenient, justifying, and sanctifying. It's out there everywhere. It's universally present in all things. And it is a power. It's a presence and a power. It's not passive. It's active. And it's creating, reconciling, renewing, forgiving, and transforming. It's transforming human hearts, communities, and the entire cosmos. Now that's grace. So grace is a powerful word. It is the summary of Christian theology, I think. Okay, it's the lens through which we view humanity and worth. That means every person is viewed through this lens of grace. That is, that this person is created out of love, bearing the image of God, participating in the flow of God's love. Every person. And that is their inherent worth and dignity. It is not in their capacities. Our worth, our identity does not lie in my ability to do or to think or produce. My inherent worth and dignity lie in the one to whom I belong. I am a beloved child of God, and it has nothing to do with how well I think, or what I can produce, or how I can be an agent of change in the world. It's just because God claims me. God creates me. And that is so important when we look at people with dementia. How many times did I hear Linda say, I'm not worth anything because I can't think clearly? Okay. The other thing that grace does is to provide a community of belonging. John Swinton says that the tragedy of people with dementia is not that they forget. The tragedy is that they are forgotten. And the isolation adds to the intensity of their symptoms. Because we need this interaction and this stimulation, this sense of belonging, this sense of meaning and purpose, of doing and being. We are stewards of one another's memories. Our memories are held in community. When I celebrated my 80th birthday, almost 2 years ago now, Sherry and Sandra sent out some invitations to people to send memories of my years. It's a book about You know, probably 40% of the memories people shared, I didn't remember. You have memories of me that I don't recall. I have memories of you, probably, that you don't recall. Because our memories are held in community, and we are stewards of each other's memories. But we are also stewards of one another's identities as beloved children of God. If I forget that I'm a child of God, it's your responsibility to hold that for me. If I forget who I am, you remember who I am. You remember me. That's what it means to be community. And we have been baptized into the community of Christ, who gives us our identity and gives us community. And that's so crucial when it comes to people with dementia. You will only lose your memory if you lose your community. Your community will hold your memory for you. Just like your community will sing for you when you can't sing. Or your community will believe for you when you can't believe. We're in community. One of the most important images given to me during my journey with Linda was given to me by Carl Minnie. Many of you know Carl. Carl was our associate at Concord for 6 years when I was there. He's been a dear friend over the years. Carl was a hospice chaplain for 25 years before he retired. But he was telling me when Linda was at home and we were surrounding her with love and care. And Carl said, you know, Ken, Linda is moving to another world. Her mind and her perception, she's moving to another world. Now yes, she's moving toward death too, and to the world of God's eternal presence. What you and your family and your caregivers are doing is providing a womb of love for her to be birthed into that new world. Is that not an image for the church? Providing wombs of love to birth one another into the new creation, into a new world. Well, let me move quickly. The Incarnational Presence is the very essence of grace and the call. And Jesus the Christ is the paradigm of that incarnation. What God did in Jesus Christ, we are called to do with one another, to be extensions of that incarnation. God, this God whose love permeates the whole of creation, became flesh in a little vulnerable, dependent, helpless baby, born among the homeless, of an unwed teenage mother in a barn, who had to have his diaper changed. Do you think Jesus was less the Son of God when he was nursing at Mary's breast than when he was hanging on a cross? If you do, you're into heresy. That would be adoptionism. We so emphasize what Jesus did in his last week, or basically his last weekend, that we forget that 98% of his life, Jesus was simply with. He was no less the Savior of the world, while Mary was changing his diaper, than when he was dying on a cross, pronouncing forgiveness for those who killed him. He was saving Mary. That person for whom you care, helpless, you have to change their adult diapers. Maybe saving you. By drawing out your love. My friend Sam Wells, who's now vicar at St. Martin in the Field with Dean Chapel at Duke, says the most important theological word is the word with. God with us. Another friend from Duke, Pure Story, with whom I get to spend 2-3 days next month. Peter Story says the most important theological word is the word all. I combine these two saints of mine and say the most important theological sentence is God with all. Well, there's tips you have at your table. Some tips for entering the world. We're to enter the world of those with dementia. You see the tips. You've been given some of these. I'm not going to spend time going over them. Take these with you. I pull these together with some adaptations. I just want to mention a couple of things. When you're entering the world of people with dementia, you got to focus on feelings, not thinking, not thoughts. Aim for the heart, not the head. Also, listen with your ears, your eyes, and your heart. Listen with all of you. The one thing I want to show the video, I want to be sure to show that. Be yourself and treat the person as another human being with dignity and worth. That's the last one. And here's what I want to emphasize. Their difficult behaviors are not meant to give you a hard time. They mean the person is having a hard time. And that's something that I had to remind myself. I lost patience at times. We all do. And I felt guilty for it. And I can think back of those times and I still feel guilty. Most of the time, Linda had forgotten it before I'd left the room. We remember it longer than the ones. Be gentle with yourself. Sherry and Sandra have reminded me of that. Dad, be gentle with yourself. Because sometimes we're hardest on ourselves. Up until about the 1970s, the major approach to living or to relating to people with dementia was called reality orientation. You would orient the persons to the present reality, so that if the person said, well, tomorrow's Christmas. No, it's not Christmas, it's the 4th of July. You would bring them out. That was reality orientation. Orient to your reality. It didn't work. Well, Naomi Feil and some others instituted what's called validation therapy. And that is you validate where they are. You enter their world. Is that not what incarnation means? God enters our world with all of its sinfulness and stupidity and limitations. But you enter their world and validate. So if they say it's Christmas, oh, who's coming for Christmas? What are you going to get for Christmas? What do you want for? Oh, I bet you had wonderful Christmases. You entered their world. Naomi filed a 5-minute video that illustrates entering the world of the other. Now let's be aware that this is not the first meeting between Naomi File and Gladys Wilson. They've had other times to be together. But so when you watch this, don't think, well, just so often it's going to happen. You've got to be there present, but then we'll come back. 2 questions. As you watch this, what feelings do you have? Secondly, who was the means of grace to the other in this video? Who was the means of grace? What are you feeling? Tender?
Admiration.
Admiration for what? Admiration.
For the ability to do what she did.
The ability to do what she did. Other feelings that just come to
Very
mind?
powerful. Just
Powerful?
A very powerful emotion.
Just overwhelming emotion, right? Where does that overwhelming feeling come from? You think? What? Pardon? Compassion.
God's love in real time.
God's love in real time.
The fact that she just continued to gently pursue her on her terms.
She just continued to gently pursue her, entering her world, including the touch, the feeling.
She wooed her.
She wooed her. She provided a womb of love, didn't she?
Sadness and joy at the same time.
Sadness and joy at the same time. Boy, did I feel that many times. Can you, from those of you who have been a caregiver with someone, how the enormous sadness, and then there is maybe it's just a look of recognition in the eye, and suddenly you feel joy because of the connection. Do you think that's how God must feel connecting? Other feelings? Comfort.
Gentleness.
Gentleness. Did you feel a sense of hope at all? That maybe there is. See, Gladys Wilson is in the advanced stage of Alzheimer's. And yet there was that connection.
She recognized that Jesus was there also.
She recognized that Jesus was there also. And you know Naomi File is Jewish? Does that matter? No. No, a Jew is singing Jesus loves me and reaching inside the depths of her experience. You know that dementia is now considered to be the most feared of all diseases in American society. But there's the 10 years of Linda's dementia were not lost years. She was never a shell of herself. She was Linda. You see, the medical lens says we're symptoms. The lens of grace says we're stories. And we are participants in God's story of grace, creating, liberating, restoring, forgiving, transforming. And you learn to kiss the joy as it flies by. That's the words of the poet Henley. One of Sherry's gifts to me was she painted a little rock with "Kiss the joy that flies by," the joy as it flies by, which I put beside Linda's bed. So that when I saw that little twinkle in her eye, maybe she's even flirting with me. Or a faint smile, or maybe just a squeeze of the hand. Or as I said one morning as I listened early in the morning, I was listening to the radio before dawn, and just sitting, and I went over and stroked her forehead and said, "Linda, I love you." I didn't even know she was awake. And she said, "I remember." And we both remembered. Who was the means of grace to the other in this trick question? I wonder which one the joy lasted the longest. I'll bet it was Naomi 5. Because she included this in one of her videos. They were means of grace to each other. When we are caregivers, we are participating in the divine flow of grace / love, and we're both being enriched. Amen.